An animal will have less control in its tail than it does in its hand and limbs, right? So, but the tail is almost halfway between like an overlappy object and an object that has full control like a hand. So it's always interesting to see how, you know, how a tail moves during an animation, because sometimes it would just follow the body, for example during a jump, and sometimes it would just try to have control when it's wrapping around something. You see like a monkey would try to wrap its tail around a tree, or there's a lot of stuff that you can do, but there's always this blend in between, and understanding that blend is very interesting. And sometimes using that blend, using that mixture of overlapping and internal energy and muscles system gives you a really cool a result. So when I'm looking at this here, and we scrub through, you see how from here to here, see how your tail moves almost with the butt of that character, right? You can see
Mhm.
that shape. Let me show you that shape that I'm looking at. So you see that shape right there. That shape almost stays the same, you know, throughout this. Like, it's, if you look at it, it goes all the way up in the same shape. So what you could do is you can pick a, so this is your first pose, right? It's a nice pose, this one right there. And then this is your second pose, right? The anticipation pose. But the shape of your tail is very similar. So
Mhm.
what you could do, what could be very exciting, is you pick your second pose, which is this one, and you find a more interesting, shape. So another interesting shape could be this. You really curl it
Mhm.
over himself. That's a cool shape, you know. Or you could actually go the other way. You can go like this, which might not be as fun or interesting. Or you could go this way. That's another one that you can do. There are a few different shapes that you can get that makes it different from that first shape. When you go into that first shape, you can see that's the first shape, and then you can completely have a different shape. So I think the one that I like the most is probably this guy. You know, it's this guy right there. This is the one I like the most. So what you do, you get your first pose, which is this one, and then you go all the way to your next pose, which is this guy, and then you actually put the shape in there. You go, this is the shape I'm gonna go for. So it almost feels like the tail squashes close to the body. It
Mhm.
helps the anticipation, you know, when this character is going to anticipate. So now when you animate from this is the shape you have, to this, it almost feels like the character tightens its butt, right? It does like a little tighten its tail, you know, on itself right before it just jumps, right? So you get that little cool feel of it. Really feels like everything is anticipating it. It's the shape of the whole character just, you know, collapses on itself before it just releases, into that little jump. So that's one cool little thing that you can do here, is change the shape of it. And then when you animate it, you have it overlap a little bit. So when the body is doing it, the tail starts to move. And when the body has stopped, the tail is finishing its squash. So the tail is a little after, a few frames after the body, which makes it, which gives that little overlappy feel. But then, because it's changed its shape, all of a sudden you're giving it some internal muscle as well. The character itself wants to change the shape. You know, it's using the tail to squash, but also there's a little bit of overlap to it because it's stopping at the end after the body has moved. So you're mixing a little bit of that internal energy plus overlapping external forces. So if you change that shape, I think that's going to make it interesting. So let's keep moving. So you have this. So that's good. And then the jump, which is nice. Yep, the jump is nice, and I think, yeah, it will fix, yep, how you have. Uh, what you could do, you could push this a slightly lower, so you get really kind of a whoosh feel. I think
Mhm.
that could actually be better. And then you make sure that you're following through the line of action of that character. Like right now, if you look at this, this is the line that I have from this character, and it makes sure it flows into that next drawing. See that?
Mhm.
You make sure it flows into that next drawing. And that's what creates some really cool arcs on the screen. Yours might feel a little too high. See how yours is a little too high, but if you
Yeah.
lower that arc and that tip right there, you get the tip to be somewhere here. Actually, not there. Hold on, let me see. Somewhere in this red right there, where I have it, and it feels like it's following this arc. That's this invisible arc that's there. All of a sudden, you're gonna get so much better shapes with it. So then you have this. So here's another thing to think about. Sometimes you could also draw an arc on your
Mm.
screen, and then when your ball is traveling through it, it's not always the best way to do things because you don't always want your tail to be following this because then it feels really mechanical all of a sudden. Even though it's organic, it still has this mechanical feel of it's following something that's exterior to your character because it's following an arc, right? But remember, there's always the internal force, so it needs to react a little bit to the body. But what you could do, you can do both. Let's say you decide to follow the arc. When the character jumps, you follow the arc. So if the thing is here, it will follow the arc. You follow the arc, you follow the arc. Then when you get around here, you start to curl. You curl it up here. You get a pose right here like I did, then you get the land pose, and then you pose the tail into a different pose completely. And then what's going to happen in between these two poses, the tail will animate into a nice little squash on the body, which will be really cool because it's landing down. So during this whole part, you're following an arc. You're letting the overlap take over. But then when you get to that place right here, you just create another pose because the tail takes over from the overlap and gravity and all that stuff. And also the tail decides, I'm going to go into a new shape. That's where you start having some really cool animation. Is you get the overlap plus the new shape. So it's really fun to actually experiment with that stuff. Does that make sense, David?
Yeah.
So, for example, here when you're here, I'm not quite seeing where the arc is. So maybe the arc here could actually be a little bit more of a curl to it. So it
Okay.
really follows the one before it. And then when you get here, you go here, here. See, when you get around there, that's not bad at all. But some people might pick this top pose right because there's a hang time, like a ball bounce, it hangs up there. Some animators actually just creates another pose up here.
Oh,
So
okay.
when your ball goes up, it actually goes whoop, your tail just follows. That moment where the ball is about
Mm.
to slow down, the tail animates up. And you get some really cool effect. Like the ball is going up, so the tail follows it. When the ball slows down, the tail just goes woo. It creates like a nice little shape up there. Then when the ball falls down, the tail follows the ball again until the ball lands down, and the tail takes another shape. So
Yeah.
you get some really nice animation in the tail. That's what's fun with tails, is you have both overlap and you have cool shapes because it's also like partially a limb. It has internal energy, it has bones and muscles, like you can make shapes with it. It's not like a cloth or hair. Like when you stop, a hair will just follow. There's no shape the hair will take other than if it's wet or whatever. But your clothes, when you're running, like your hoodie when you're running, it won't change into a major shape, when you stop, right? It'll just flap on your back. It's just like an overlap. So the tail is different, right? When you're running and stuff, it will follow, but then when you stop, the tail will strike into a pose because you have more control over it. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that
See,
helps.
that's nice right there. I think you kind of doing it. You do strike a shape right there, which is nice. But then at the end there, look at that. It feels like it just dies down. It doesn't feel like it's striking a shape anymore. Like I would make that tail instead of the tail when your ball is rotating down, and the tail does the same thing as the ball is. What I would do is I would keep animating the tail so the tail gets a better shape. Even though your ball is relaxing, let the tail animate upwards and get into a nice pose.
Okay.
Then we'll feel like he has a little bit more control of that tail, right? And be careful of, for example, see how you have a straight line here and then a curl here. It feels like it could flow a little bit better in your. If you're gonna do this, it'll probably be more like this.
Mm.
You give it a little bit more rotation on here and on here, so you get a nicer curl on the back. So,
Okay.
so it'll be difficult to get the shape that I'm doing, of course, but try your best. Try what you can to get the lower one, to rotate a little bit upwards, get the middle one to do this, and then get this one to do this. see what you can do to get that shape. It's difficult, I know, with this rig to try and get that shape, but just do your best and see what you can get.